Well. Hello and happy marvelous Monday, everybody. I hope that you are well. I am Karissa Span, the landlord and tenant coach. I am super excited that you are joining me today for a much needed conversation. We are talking about housekeeping. Who's responsible? Is it the landlord's responsibility or is it the tenant's responsibility? This has been one of the great debates of all time, right? And so I'm going to cover that today. I promise that the information that I share today, my only goal is to make sure that it's clear, it is relevant, and it is understandable. I promise that I will not give legal advice. However, I will share information based off of the industry's best tips and practices today. So, if you are a landlord or a tenant, please let me know if you have any comments or any questions. I will be addressing them today. I promise I'm not going to hold you long. I recognize that this is a holiday weekend, but I understand that this is a conversation that many people have been having, and I received a lot of email requests regarding this conversation and subject today. So I thought it would be fitting to do part one. Make sure you come back next week for part two as I get into it. All right. And so today, I just want to make sure that this conversation is interactive. And again, I encourage you to share your thoughts if you have comments, if you have questions, or if you have personal experiences that you feel is relevant and you would like for me to share. Please go ahead and drop it in the comment section. But I do want to just make sure that I am big on respect. So let's have an engaging but respectful conversation today. If something is shared or if you see some comments, if you're watching a replay and you see some comments in the chat box, please respect other people's rights to share their feedback and information. So I hope that you are prepared for this conversation. And again, this is part one. So next week, I'm going to do a deeper dive. So please make sure that if you have already if you have not already subscribed to the YouTube channel, please make sure that you hit that subscribe button, click that notification bell so that you will be notified. And please make sure that you are tagging your friends who are landlords, who are tenants, who are housing providers, anybody in the property management, real estate arena. Please make sure that you tag them or share this. Listen, the one thing that I do recognize is that people have different viewpoints, people have different styles, right? But I'm always respectful of others. And so information that I share are true stories. I have been in the property management space for almost 3 decades. And so I share information for landlords and tenants because ultimately I'm hoping to help improve the entire rental community. So let's go ahead and create an inclusive dialogue about ways that we could provoke positive change. All right. So today I do want to talk about, I'm going to give 3 tips for landlords, and then I'm going to share some information for tenants. And then again, next week, we're going to go a little bit deeper. I'll have some true case studies based off of my personal experience pertaining to poor tenant housekeeping. And then also discussing responsibilities and roles. All right. So I know that a lot of people have not really understood roles and responsibilities. And so when I say a lot of people, I'm talking about tenants and landlords, right? And so sometimes in that space, there is a common misconception and oftentimes a great misunderstanding in terms of who's responsible to complete repairs. And many of you know that one of my biggest philosophies that I've shared is that if you treat it like a business, it should pay you like a business. If you treat it like a hobby, it should, in fact, pay you like a hobby. I had a young lady who reached out to me recently. She's a tenant and she had some questions pertaining to some things that were going on at the property. And she wanted to know if what the landlord was trying to do was legal or illegal. So the first thing I questioned was what's in writing, what's in the lease, because um, landlords usually cannot enforce something that does not exist, meaning that it must and it should be in writing. And if not, many cases if the landlord even tries to take the tenant to court for it, right? There are certain set of circumstances, but for the most part, if it's not in writing, I don't care if the landlord, I don't care if you're the owner and you threaten to take the tenant to court. If it's not in writing, it cannot be executed. You can't enforce something that does not exist. All right, so today I want to cover some hard truths for landlords, but as well as for tenants. All right, so the first set of tips I'm going to share are going to be for landlords first. Let me start with landlords and then I will touch on tenants. Um, when it comes to managing property or owning property, there are some legal obligations or responsibilities of landlords. Give me 1 second. Let me make sure that I silence my phone. So there are some legal responsibilities, okay? And landlords, please understand and know that it is definitely essential for you to recognize that you do have legal obligations regarding the condition of your rental property. So that's first and foremost, right? This includes providing a home that's decent, that's safe, that's sanitary, um, that's just a requirement. It doesn't matter if it's a house, it could be an apartment, it could be a condo, it could be a mobile home, it could be a townhouse, it could be a duplex. It doesn't really matter, right? It's if it's rental property, you're renting it out. If it's a business, you're collecting money. I don't let me backtrack because even if it's a charity, right? If you are leasing space, this is for landlords, whether residential or commercial, but primarily residential today. You have a legal obligation to make sure that the rental property is decent, safe, and sanitary. All right. So you are to make sure that before the tenant moves in, that it's clean. You got to make sure that it meets local, state, federal um, housing code requirements. So, for instance, if your rental property is leased to a participant or tenants who are in any type of housing program, you are governed by the standards or the regulations of that program. All right. And if not, you can be held accountable legally. All right. You want to make sure that to make sure that you are adhering to your legal responsibilities, that you are addressing issues that tenants are complaining about, maybe regarding plumbing or electrical. Um, it could be pest control, right? You are legally obligated to make sure that your rental property is in compliance at the minimum on the levels that I just shared above. All right. You want to make sure that the structural integrity of the property is intact. I have inspected a couple of properties, and for whatever reason, the landlord, the owner, I'm not sure if they overlooked the structural damage that was clearly visible before you enter the property. But for whatever reason, it was there, it was present, it was visible, and the owner allowed tenants to move in or had this grand idea that it was okay for tenants to move in under that condition. Absolutely wrong, absolutely false. Um, and I share this information because I know that maybe sometimes owners don't have the financial means to take care of big ticket items. But still, because it is a business, you are required by law to do so. And for those of you who are watching and you self manage your property, you've always self managed your property. I give two thumbs up to you. If I had more, I would give you more. But you still want to make sure that your property is in compliance. Okay. You want to definitely make sure that there is clear communication. That is so crucial. That's so critical. Having clear communication with your tenants because this helps to give a better understanding, and it also kind of removes the misunderstanding. So you want to be clear. You want to make sure. When I say clear communication, Any conversations that you have with your tenant, I've always emphasized and stressed how important it is to follow up in writing with your tenants. And while tenants do have a responsibility to make sure that when they lease the place, they're renting it, they're occupying it, that they are adhering to the terms of the rental lease agreement. And by all means, if you see something, say something. I'm really, really big on, if you see something, say something. I believe that sometimes people do things for two reasons. People do things because either A, they don't know, or B, because they don't care, right? And so I am, by nature, I am an educator. Um, I'm also a property management educator. And so I believe in educating tenants, right? And so if I see something, if I'm inspecting a rental property, if I'm walking through the property, if I identify any problems or issues, I'm going to have a soft conversation immediately. And I do that because I recognize that everybody may not be aware, and my eyes will naturally see what others may not see. And in many cases, I've gone into rentals and I wasn't there to inspect it, but because that's a second, like, natural thing for me to do, is like my eyes are just trained to see what others don't see. And it's just something I can't turn off. But I've gone into rental properties and I would see something. So let's say, for instance, I'm just going in to talk to a tenant, right? Maybe the tenant complained about, um, I don't know, the oven isn't lighting, right? So we had to go and take a look at the oven. But on the way to the kitchen, I'm noticing that in the living room, the door is off the hinge. Or as I'm entering the kitchen, I noticed that the refrigerator, um, it looked like the gasket, the seal around the refrigerator was either ripped or torn. And so I addressed those things because it's what I noticed, is what I saw. And so I just have conversations with tenants to help them understand how important it is to maintain the home, but also it's so important for them to communicate what problems they have at the property. And I explain why each of those areas are important. And so obviously a door being off the hinge. Um, if the door, let's say for instance, the door fall and it injures someone at the property, we definitely wouldn't want that to happen. Or if the gasket or the refrigerator seal is off, ripped, or torn, how important it is to make sure it's replaced, because it's preserving the energy of, and make sure and making sure that it controls the contents of the refrigerator, right? And so all of those things are important, although they may seem small to so many people. It's really not. And when it comes to maintenance and repairs, anything that goes incomplete, not repaired, not replaced, it will not improve itself overnight or ever, right? And so I explain that to tenants so that they will understand it. And so you always want to make sure that that clear line of communication is there. You want to make sure that you follow up in writing. You want to make sure that expectations are spelled out in the rental lease agreement before tenants even sign a lease. And I've had landlords who have reached out to me. They said, well, hey, Karissa, listen, um, there's some changes that we want to make in the lease, but the tenant refuses to sign. And the rental property is also located in a jurisdiction where I can't terminate the lease. And even when the lease is up, I can't force the tenant to leave. What do I do? So in that case, I always emphasize having another conversation with the tenant, letting them know you do want to make some changes, that there are no changes that are going to be made to maybe the rental amount, but you want to be able to provide an updated lease agreement. You want to provide more protection for the tenant, explaining how you're going to conduct repairs and inspections, and how you just want to make sure that it's spelled out in the lease. I always say communicate. Let the tenant know what's going on. Don't be shisty. I know that some landlords will try to add extra things and they don't want the tenant to know until after the tenant has signed the lease. I believe in being upfront and honest with tenants, right? Even if it is a rent increase, right? Communicate that. And that's something that the tenant should know about well in advance. You don't just tell a tenant today, oh, by the way, your rent is going to increase next week. You want to make sure that you're giving them proper notice in accordance to whatever the laws are in that particular area. So whether it's a 30-day notice or 60-day notice, please make sure that that communication is clear, that you are communicating that to the tenant well in advance. Because when you do these type of things can help foster a really great relationship, and you get a lot of cooperation from your tenants. And ultimately, and sometimes it does prevent misunderstandings. And so clear communication is so crucial. And then also, and probably this should have been number one, proper screening and selection of tenants. It does matter. And I know so many people are looking for tenants right now. They're looking for the best tenant who's going to give them the best um, rate, right? And so in some areas, landlords are struggling and stressed out over the rent, how much they can receive monthly for that rental lease contract. And so when that happens, um, you want to make sure that first and foremost, you're screening your applicants, you're screening prospects before they become an applicant. So at the prospect age or stage, that's really where you want to emphasize your requirements of the rental property. This is where you get to know who might be a good fit, because ultimately you want to cherry pick from a pool of well qualified applicants. Okay, so at the prospect stage, you want to communicate what the rules are, what you're looking for in a tenant, and then also ask the tenant what they are looking for or expecting out of you as their landlord, because that's also important. Because sometimes if landlords, and I'm just a firm believer of having that clear and upfront, honest conversation. If you ask those questions up front, the tenants will tell you, well, my last landlord didn't make repairs, or my last landlord was intrusive, or my last landlord was rude. And they would come over without calling, or they didn't make repairs. Like, if you ask the right questions, you'll get the answers that you're looking for. And so don't be afraid to ask those questions. Have those conversations, asking the prospect, hey, what are you looking for in your ideal landlord? Like, I may not be able to be that person, but I just want to know what your expectations are. What are you looking for in a landlord? Now, I get it, for those of you who manage hundreds of doors, that may not always be an option. But if you have someone managing your property, maybe add that to the application process. And so one of the things that I teach in my property management class, I tell my students to not be afraid to ask the hard questions, create a streamlined checklist as pertains to the application process. Make sure that it's clear, make sure that it's in writing what your expectations are. So when an applicant is getting ready to apply and they complete that application, whether it's online or it's a paper application, the criteria is clear. And then when you are having those conversations, whether they're in your office, whether it's on the phone, or maybe you're doing some sort of virtual meeting or virtual orientation with them, just convey all of those things, right? Have your prospect or applicant to complete a survey. And this is some of the things that I share with my clients who are owners and landlords and property managers, those who are real estate investors, right? So I kind of walk them through what that looks like and how to ask those questions without violating fair housing laws. Because let's just be clear that although I'm suggesting that you ask the right questions, there are still laws that are in place that prevents you from asking certain questions. Okay, so you never want to violate fair housing laws, because what you don't know can and will hurt you. Although you may not be trying to intentionally violate the law, you have to understand that laws are in place. And so, first and foremost, understand the laws. And with proper screening, that really will make a big difference. And so, and that's one of the crucial steps, right? This step here, it's crucial to help avoid housekeeping issues or misunderstandings, because throughout the tenant selection, you're now able to identify what you're looking for. You can help them understand how important their role is in maintaining a decent, safe, and sanitary home. And while it's not possible to guarantee perfect tenants, through your prospect screening process, you can definitely identify the best candidates. And this will definitely reduce the likelihood of encountering rather, or reducing this housekeeping issue that we're starting to see a lot of news coverage about. So please make sure that you are doing that. I do want to turn my attention to the tenants for a minute, because this is also important for tenants. I want them to know and understand how important it is to maintain a home. All right. But before I do that, let me just acknowledge some people who are here. Hey, Jackie, thank you so much for tuning in today. Beautiful, happy, marvelous Monday. Hello, Bishop Charity. How are you? Thank you so much for tuning in. And so today, as we are talking about housekeeping tips, Jackie, please make sure that if you get a chance to share this information with those who you know are landlords. All right. So 3 tips for tenants. 3 things here. Make sure that if you are renting property, right? Please make sure that you do this. First and foremost, respect your rental lease agreement. All right. Respect the lease agreement. Familiarize yourself with the terms, with the conditions that are outlined in the lease before you sign the contract. Here's why that's important. Because when you sign a lease as a tenant, it's almost like you're getting married, right? Before you jump into a marriage, before you jump into bed, before you say, I do, you want to get to know that person a little bit more. Well, most people do. But in any event, you understand, right? So respect the lease agreement. Familiarize yourself with it. Ask questions. Look over the lease before you sign it so that you clearly know what you are signing. Don't assume you know what it means, right? Get a clear understanding of your responsibilities pertaining to housekeeping. All right. You want to make sure that you get a clear understanding of your responsibilities as pertains to maintenance and cleanliness, right? Because if you sign a lease saying that you're going to maintain the rental property in a way that is decent, safe, and sanitary, and you're not doing it, then the landlord could and probably should take you to court, right? So understand that first. Adhere to what you sign, right? And unfortunately, after you sign the lease, you can't come back and say, oh, well, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, I didn't understand it, so I shouldn't be held accountable. The landlord could very well say, well, too bad, so sad. You signed it. It's a legally binding document, and they can hold you accountable for what you signed. So um, please make sure that you understand that. Please also make sure that you understand the importance of communicating with your landlord. I just strongly believe in having clear, honest, and upfront, transparent communication um, in that landlord and tenant process, right? So keep that communication line clear, concise, and open. If you're a tenant and you are encountering maintenance issues, promptly communicate that. Tell your landlord what's going on, whether it's by phone, whether you have a an email address, an online tenant portal. Make sure that you are communicating what the issues are. Because here's the thing, some landlords can and should, if they listen to me, hold tenants accountable for not reporting matters promptly. For instance, in my rental lease agreement, my lease package is at least 61 pages long. No exaggeration. My lease package is at least 61 pages long. Now, unfortunately, because of technology, it's online. I don't have to print all of those documents and forms anymore. The tenants can read it online. They can sign it digitally online. So thankfully, we are in this electronic new age era where everything is digitized. But yeah, my lease package is at least 61 pages long. And I cover information in the lease to make sure that the tenant understand roles, rights, responsibilities. Um, but for instance, if there is an issue with pest control in my lease package, or well, lease packages that I create for clients now, because I've just kind of transitioned to something else. But so I put an emphasis on tenants being responsible for reporting issues. If they see any type of pest control issue, a bug, a roach, a spider, a mouse, an ant, a rat, a rodent, whatever, right? It is their responsibility to notify the landlord immediately within 5 days. If there is some sort of infestation in the rental property, and let me just define infestation. Infestation is defined as two or more, not 10, not 20, two or more is infested. Okay. And so if the tenant does not report the issue and the landlord has now come into awareness that there's some sort of infestation, the tenant is now responsible for the cost. Now, it is the landlord's responsibility to contact the pest control company, to make the schedule, to set things up, to give tenant proper notice. I walk them through all of that and how that looks. But now it's on the tenant because they did not report it before the place became infested. Here's why that's important. I'm going to use, for instance, bed bugs. I have inspected rental property that was severely infested with bed bugs. And if any of you have ever experienced that, it is a problem that you never want to have. As a matter of fact, next week for part two, I'm going to share pictures because I want it to be clear, because sometimes pictures will show a whole lot more, will give that visual, something that my verbal words really can't. I can't really paint the picture, but if I show you the pictures, big difference. So anyway, uh, I've gone into some rental properties and the place was infested from the beginning of entering that place to the end, from the router to the tutor, from the ceiling to the floor, from the walls to every door, severely infested with bed bugs. In that case, the tenant's furniture had to be discarded. There is a certain treatment. There are things that the tenants must do to prepare. And just depending on how bad the infestation is with the bed bugs, the pest control company may have to go out a couple of times. So please make sure, as a tenant, you are communicating with your landlord, because if not, that landlord can hold you responsible for the bill. And bed bug treatment is not cheap. I've had bed bug treatments that cost hundreds of dollars up to thousands of dollars for one property, just for one place. So please make sure that you understand that timely reporting matters, is necessary. And then ultimately, it keeps the quality of your home at a level that should make you happy and want to stay there, right? Nobody, let me say it this way. You should want to be in an environment that's clean, right? Nobody deserves to live somewhere that is deplorable and it's so god awful that you don't want to invite people over, right? And so sometimes asking your landlord to help you out, even if it's poor housekeeping, sometimes that can really, get you on the right track. So please make sure you are communicating with your landlord. Third tip for tenants today is really, really something that's near and dear to my heart. I see this as a lack in a lot of places, but not all tenants struggle with this issue. But take pride in the place that you call home. Doesn't matter if you've lived there for a day, a decade, or almost a century. Treat it like it's your own. Treat it, give it love, give it respect, give it value, right? And make sure that you are maintaining it to the highest level possible as it pertains to cleanliness and just hygiene and just basically general upkeep. If you cook on the stove, wipe it down. It's okay to wipe the grease off after you finish cooking, after you take a bath or a shower, or maybe your kids or your loved ones, your boo thing comes over. Clean the tub, clean the toilet, take the trash out, sweep the floor, wipe the walls down. Listen, when my kids were growing up, and all of my kids are grown now, But my kids will tell you, like on a Saturday, I had them jokers with a bucket and water. They wiping the walls, the plate covers, when you turn the switch off and on, they wipe that down. They wiping the doors down, the refrigerator down, because cleanliness is next to godliness. That's just how I grew up. That's churchy. I know I'm not in church, but some things you just can't help, right? But that's how I was raised. And so I raised my kids like that. And so sometimes when I go into rental properties, and this is why I educate tenants, because I know that everybody just don't know this information. And let's just be clear that common sense isn't so common for everybody. And so that's why I strongly believe if you see something, say something. Address issues. If you see that repairs are needed, if the faucet is leaking, let your landlord know, especially if you have to pay the water bill, because every drip that is leaking out of that faucet, whether it's in the kitchen, whether it's in the bathroom, somebody is paying for it. If you hear the toilet running, that's not natural. The toilet is not supposed to run or make a continuous noise unless you're flushing it, and then it's supposed to stop. And so if you hear a continuous sound like, oh, I hear something, let my landlord know, right? If your refrigerator is making a continuous sound that it should not make, I hear something, let my landlord know, right? If your smoke detector, let me put a great emphasis on this. If your smoke detector is beeping or chirping, it's an indicator that the battery is either dead or needs to be replaced. I know a lot of people like to take the battery out because when you cook, it's always going off. But let me tell you, I promise it's better to have that smoke detector beeping and in place, that battery is in place, because if a fire breaks out, it's going to alert you that there's a fire, right? And so please make sure that even if these things seem small, listen to what I'm saying. It's not really small. There are a lot of news stories where people had fires and people died in the rental property because the smoke detector didn't have a battery. It's there to notify you, to alert you that there's an emergency, and it could possibly save your life. True story. And I'm going to close on this shortly. I was managing a rental property, and I think in that property, it had almost 600 doors. And for some reason, there was a fire that broke out in, it was on the third floor of that apartment building. So someone lit a cigarette or whatever they were smoking, and they just left out. So I think maybe they dropped it. They thought maybe they put it back on a ashtray or whatever. Didn't happen, didn't make the ashtray. So it fell, it caught fire. The whole place went up in smoke. The fire was so bad because by the time the fire department got in, it was just too late. And so that whole apartment, when I say the entire apartment went up in smoke, I mean that all you can see were the frames, like the bricks and the frames that when they built that apartment, like the walls, the furniture, everything was gone. It was just burned, right? And not only did that tenant lose all of their valuable belongings, but other tenants were impacted by the fire. So if the fire or the smoke didn't spread to the other units in the building, the water from the fireman's water hose damaged the apartments below. And so it created a nightmare. They didn't have renter's insurance. There were no batteries in the smoke detector. So if the smoke detector could have gone off, it would have alerted somebody, maybe somebody in the building, that there was a fire. So someone could have called the fire department a whole lot sooner. And so I always like to err on the side of caution. Please be safe. Please do the right thing. Please be responsible as a tenant, because this will go a long way. You want to maintain a really good landlord and tenant relationship beyond just paying your rent on time, right? So taking care of your rental property is always the best thing to do. It like I said, it fosters a good relationship, open communication with your landlords. And again, I've shared information for landlords, and I hope that, something that I shared today was helpful, that it was of value, because ultimately, and what I want you all to understand that having a balanced landlord and tenant relationship is so important. When tenants and landlords both understand your roles and your responsibilities for maintaining a well maintained rental property, then I believe that this is how rental properties are improved as a whole. Doesn't matter if the tenant is black or white, blue, purple, if the landlord is rich or poor, if the rental property is a subsidized housing property or a market rental, it doesn't matter, right? What matters is how you conduct that business. It is a business. So that's what I wanted to share today. And next week, when I come back, I am definitely going to go a little deeper into the woods. I'm going to share pictures next week. Hello, Dolores. Thank you so much for tuning in from my YouTube channel. You say you own property in DC. Where can you go to obtain robust lease agreements with terms as mine? Great question. So, Dolores, let me share my email address. I'm going to come back to some of the questions and comments in the chat box. Hey, Lynette, thank you so much for tuning in from North Carolina. Hey, Kim, thanks for tuning in from South Carolina. All right, let me pull up my email address for you, and then I'm going to address some of the comments that are in the chat box. So email me, Miss Johnson, and I will send you over a link to the lease that I use. If you need help preparing a rental lease agreement, my team can definitely assist you with that as well. So thank you for that. All right. Lynette, you said them things are evil. Okay. Your complex used to check twice a year to do a fire check. Used to, as in past tense, that's not good if they're not doing it. And you say, all right, but they want our rent on time, but can't fix what you request in a timely manner. That's a problem. Lynette, please make sure you share my channel with your landlord. Tell them to tune in every Monday at 7:30 p.m. Maybe they could use some of this free information, all right, that I'm sharing. But definitely, if you have any issues that I can help you with, reach out to me, sis, and I will help you out with that. All right. Here's another question. You place your home. Okay, how do you get thank you so much for tuning in from the YouTube channel. Let me acknowledge you. How do you get the tenant to stop removing the smoke detector batteries? Great question. So, number one, I would question what area of that rental property is your smoke detector? If it's in an area where, for instance, I shared how sometimes when tenants or when people cook in general, not just tenants, but anybody, depending on where the smoke detector is placed, sometimes heat, you know, will trigger and that sensor will detect the heat and it'll automatically go off. And so the tenants will remove the battery. So also the tenant may just get tired of you know, of the device beeping or chirping, right? And so I would question where's the device? If it's in the kitchen, if it's in an area where maybe they're cooking or they're smoking and it's triggering that smoke detector to go off, it might go off a little more often than the tenant like, but just let them know, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Tenant, we really value you as a tenant, and it's so important for you to understand why you should not take the battery out. We would not want something to happen. And obviously, we can place the smoke detector in another area of the home. And then also, here's another tip for your smoke detectors. Please do not use dollar store batteries for the smoke detectors. Please go ahead and get yourself invest in some, not to say that this is your issue, but just in general, I just want to put this plug out there. Get some good batteries, Energizer, Duracell, those good batteries, because sometimes the dollar store batteries may last for 4 quarters. So that could be an issue. So have that conversation with the tenant. Hey, Ben, thank you so much for tuning in. So I do hope that helps. All right. So Lynette, you said have the lease, have the lease, have the least the greatest change? If residents keep getting a cough called and on them and keep breaking the rules, do you wait for something to happen? How long does it take? Uh, Lynette, sometimes I think that let me just say this because I've been in, I've been in property management in the property management housing industry for almost 30 years, 3 decades in various roles and capacities. And so sometimes if management is new, you have new people in the office, you have maybe property managers who are inexperienced, um, or maybe you have, people who don't really have a heart or care about the tenants, right? And it happens. Let's just be real. Some people are not in it for they care about getting a paycheck without really having a heart. And I get it. It's their business. They can do whatever they want. But at the end of the day, they are still required by law, Lynette, or any tenant who's watching. Landlords are still required by law to make sure that repairs are completed. They don't have to like you. They don't have to like what you look like. They cannot violate laws based off of how they feel. They could be having a bad day, but they are still required to respond to maintenance requests. So let me know if you're having some issues, Lynette. I know that you've previously shared some concerns with your regarding your landlord. If you're still having those issues, I want to make sure that I can help try to get that resolved for you. Can you require rental insurance? You absolutely can, depending on where the rental property is. So some great questions. Some jurisdictions um, say that you cannot require it. However, you can strongly recommend it. You can put it in your lease. And if it's in the lease, have a conversation with the tenant to say, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Tenant, we are strongly advising or recommending that you get renter's insurance. Maybe provide them with some quotes from some companies, kind of like call around, get some insurance companies and share that information with them. So that they'll have an idea of what it may cost them, right? Renter's insurance could be 9, 10, $20 a month, if that. But emphasize and stress to them how important it is to have renter's insurance, because if anything happens, you or your insurance will not cover damage or loss to their items, regardless if it's theirs, their kids, their mamas, their baby mamas, their boyfriend, their boo thing. It doesn't matter. Your insurance will not cover tenants' belongings. And so having those conversations up front sometimes can help. And if you have it in your rental lease agreement that you are strongly recommending it, make sure, as I have it in mind, make sure that you emphasize that in the lease. And then also in my lease agreements, I have tenants to initial that box saying that they understand that they have been strongly recommended to get renter's insurance. And if they don't, well, Mr. and Mrs. Tenant, I'm sorry that you had a fire and you lost everything, or water damage your property, and you can't get your precious valuable belongings back, and because you didn't have insurance, there's no way that you can replace it. I apologize that you didn't accept insurance. So just have those conversations up front. But great question. Hey, Jennifer, thank you for tuning in. Happy marvelous Monday. So today, Jennifer, we're talking about housekeeping and who's responsible. Next week, please call me, Lynette. Next week, I'm going to go a little deeper into this. Next week, I'm going to have pictures with case studies of rental properties and issues that I want to share with you. Okay, if they break the lease agreement over and over and the cops come, how long does it take to remove them? Great question. And so if tenants are breaking the lease and there is now a paper trail, right? So you have the cops that's being called to one particular address over and over and over again. As long as the landlord has specified in the lease that it is a violation, they can't be a nuisance to other tenants, they can't have certain legal activity going on. And if there's a paper trail, there are police reports that can document that, the landlord can definitely take the tenant to court, because that would in fact be a violation of the lease and would be cause to terminate the lease. But the landlord must take the tenant to court. Great question. All right. Any other questions before I hop off today, I did want to share that information. So let me just do a recap of what I shared today because sharing is caring. Lynette, you said paper trail, pictures, um, videos are so important. So you got paper trail, um, parties, and more. So at this point, the landlord just need to go ahead and take this tenant to court and enforce the lease. All right. So the three hard truths that I shared for landlords today, very simple. Landlords are responsible um, legally for maintaining a home that's decent, safe, and sanitary. I talked about having clear lines of communication with your tenant. And then my third tip for landlords was very simple. Proper screening and tenant selection is important. And when you're renting property, have those conversations with prospects before they become an applicant. So there's a prospect phase, there's an applicant phase, and then there's a tenant phase, right? So a prospect is before anybody signs the application. They're just interested in renting the property. The applicant is when they express an interest. Okay, they've seen the property, they're interested in submitting an application because they believe that they want to rent that place, right? And then the tenant portion is when they sign the lease, they say I do, they're ready to get the keys and they're ready to move in. So proper screening is so important to have those conversations up front what your expectations are. Three tips for tenants that I share today is number one, by all means, please respect the lease agreement. Please communicate with your landlord. If you see something, say something promptly and on time, because if not, it could cost you. And then also, third and finally, for tenants, your tip today, your third and final tip for today is to take pride in the place that you call home, right? Treat it like it's your own. Go above and beyond, maintain it, keep it clean, um, feel good. As a matter of fact, make the bed up. It just does something to me when I come home and my bed is made, right? When the place is just clean and it smells good. It's so inviting, right? I love natural sunlight. And so when I wake up, I want the sun to shine on my face. When I come home after a long day, I want to come into a room that's clean. I want to come into a room where the bed is made. I want to come into a room that smells fresh. I don't want to have to smell mildew, dirty clothes, that sort of thing. I mean, I haven't had to experience that since my son was a teenager. He was in high school. He's well into his 30s now. I hope he's not watching because he might have a problem with me sharing that publicly. But you understand what I'm saying. So take pride in the place that you call home. All right. So I do hope that this information was helpful today. Um, you do have my email address. It's carissaspan@gmail.com. Listen, this is what I do each and every Monday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I share information. Sharing is caring. I promise it costs you absolutely nothing but your time to show up and to get this information. Ladies and gentlemen, my time is up. I thank you for yours. That's my email address. If you need to reach me, please make sure that you tune in next week for part two with pictures. I promise next week you don't want to miss. Make sure that you share it. Make sure you tag somebody. Make sure that you like it. Please also subscribe to my YouTube channel. All right. You want to hit that notification bell so that when I go live, sometimes I might come on early, sometimes I might come on a little bit later, but I promise I'm going to come on, I'm going to give you some information. All right. It's going to be real deal, Holyfield. I am Karissa Span, the landlord and tenant coach. I will see you all next week, 7:30 p.m. right here on either Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube.